In 1963, Joseph Bonanno made a decision that would change the American Mafia forever. He plotted to assassinate multiple bosses on the Mafia Commission, including Carlo Gambino and Tommy Lucchese. The plan was ambitious, dangerous, and ultimately exposed by Joseph Colombo. What happened next sparked the Bonanno War, a violent conflict that tore apart Bonanno's family and forced him into exile. But this wasn't the end of his story. It was just another chapter in the life of a man who always seemed to stay one step ahead of death. Picture a 19-year-old with nothing but the clothes on his back, hiding in the cramped cargo hold of a Cuban fishing boat as it cuts through dark Atlantic waters toward America in 1924. Giuseppe Bonanno clutched his empty stomach and wondered if he would survive the journey. The boat reeked of fish and diesel fuel. Other passengers whispered prayers in Italian. Most of them carried a few dollars or the address of a relative who might help them find work. Bonanno had neither. When the boat docked in New York Harbor, Giuseppe Bonanno stepped onto American soil as just another face in the endless stream of Italian immigrants flooding into the city. He had no money, no connections, and no legal status. Immigration officials processed thousands of young men like him every week. Most headed straight to Little Italy or the Bronx, where they found cramped apartments and backbreaking jobs in factories or construction sites. They sent money home to Sicily and saved pennies for their families. This was the honest path, the safe path. Bonanno made a different choice entirely. While other young immigrants took jobs that paid a few dollars a week, he decided to study the power structures that already controlled the Italian neighborhoods. He watched how established bosses operated their territories and collected tribute from local businesses. He observed which cafes the important men frequented and which streets they avoided. Other young men saw only chaos and violence in organized crime. Bonanno saw patterns and opportunities. The statistics were against him completely. Research from the period shows that most young immigrants who entered organized crime died within 5 years, usually from bullets or betrayal. The survivors rarely advanced beyond low-level muscle work. They collected debts, intimidated shopkeepers, and took orders from men who had arrived decades earlier. The established hierarchy seemed impossible to crack for someone with no family connections or tribal loyalties. Yet Bonanno identified something that others missed entirely. The old Sicilian bosses were fighting yesterday's wars while America demanded fresh strategies and modern thinking. They clung to traditions that made sense in rural Sicily but created vulnerabilities in urban New York. They spoke only Italian in a country that increasingly required English. They trusted only blood relatives in a business that needed broader networks. Instead of challenging authority directly, which would have meant certain death, Bonanno positioned himself as indispensable to the right people at precisely the right moment. He learned English quickly and studied American business practices. He understood that successful criminal enterprises needed the same organizational skills as legitimate companies. He offered services that the old bosses didn't even know they needed. His breakthrough came when he demonstrated something rare in the violent world of organized crime: strategic patience combined with cultural intelligence. While other young men rushed into conflicts or demanded immediate recognition, Bonanno waited for opportunities and prepared himself to seize them. He read newspapers to understand political developments. He cultivated relationships with both Sicilian traditionalists and American-born criminals. He never acted impulsively or let emotions drive his decisions. The transformation was remarkable by any measure. By age 26, this penniless stowaway had become the youngest boss in New York Mafia history. He hadn't achieved this position through violence or intimidation, though he was certainly capable of both. He had done it by understanding power itself, how it flowed through organizations, and how it could be redirected through careful planning and superior intelligence. His success attracted attention from older, more established bosses who began to see him as either a valuable ally or a dangerous threat. Some admired his innovative approaches to traditional problems. Others worried that his methods might upset the delicate balance of power that kept the peace between competing families. But Bonanno's real test was about to arrive in the form of a war that would determine who controlled organized crime in America for the next generation. Imagine discovering that your mentor and protector is about to be murdered, and you have seconds to decide whether to die with him or betray everything he taught you. This was the impossible choice Joseph Bonanno faced in September 1931, when Lucky Luciano's assassination plot against Salvatore Maranzano reached its final stage. During the Castellamarese War, Bonanno had aligned himself completely with Maranzano, the powerful Sicilian boss who became both his father figure and his guide through the treacherous world of organized crime. Maranzano represented everything that traditional mafia culture valued. He spoke in proverbs and ancient wisdom. He demanded absolute respect from his subordinates. He believed that the old ways of Sicily could be transplanted directly to American soil without modification or compromise. Maranzano had taken Bonanno under his wing during the brutal conflict against Joe Masuria's faction. He taught him the intricate codes of honor that governed their secretive world. Respect your elders. Never betray family secrets. Show loyalty through action, not just words. These weren't just business principles to Maranzano. They were sacred traditions passed down through generations of Sicilian men who had fought and died to preserve them. When Luciano secretly plotted Maranzano's assassination, Bonanno faced the most difficult decision of his young life. Loyalty to his mentor meant certain death, because Luciano's plans included eliminating Maranzano's closest associates. But survival meant abandoning the very principles that Maranzano had drilled into him during their years together. The choice seemed to offer no middle ground. Historical evidence suggests that Bonanno knew about Luciano's plans well before September 10, 1931. Some mob experts believe his survival depended on his tacit support of Luciano's actions. In his autobiography, Bonanno claimed he learned about the plot only from Stefano Megadino, but this version of events seems designed to protect his reputation rather than reveal the truth. The timing of his absence from Maranzano's office that day was too convenient to be coincidental. While Maranzano died believing completely in the old system of capo di tutti capi, Bonanno had already begun to recognize that American organized crime needed modern solutions. The traditional Sicilian approach worked in small villages where everyone knew each other and family connections determined everything. But New York demanded different strategies. The city was too big, too diverse, and too complex for medieval codes of conduct. Bonanno understood something that his mentor never grasped. Rigid loyalty to dying leaders was itself a betrayal of the larger cause they all claimed to serve. The Mafia existed to create wealth and power for its members, not to preserve outdated traditions that no longer served their purpose. True leadership meant knowing when to adapt and when to let go of the past. The moment Maranzano fell to Luciano's assassins, Bonanno didn't waste time mourning or seeking revenge. He immediately began adapting to the new reality that Luciano was creating. He chose what he himself described as the path of peace, aligning himself with the Young Turks who were reshaping American organized crime. This decision proved that his intelligence extended far beyond simple cunning or street smarts. Bonanno's mentor's death became his greatest opportunity. He inherited the bulk of Maranzano's family and immediately began reshaping it for a new era. At age 26, he became one of the youngest bosses in New York Mafia history, not through violence or inheritance, but through strategic thinking and perfect timing. He had learned from Maranzano's mistakes while preserving the best elements of traditional Sicilian culture. This survival instinct became the defining characteristic of every major decision Bonanno made for the next 4 decades. He never again allowed personal loyalty to cloud his strategic judgment, and he never forgot that in organized crime, adaptation was the difference between leadership and death. What if the most important innovation in Mafia history came not from a street thug, but from a boss who read poetry and studied political philosophy? While most crime bosses of the 1930s ruled their territories through raw intimidation and brutal violence, Joseph Bonanno approached organized crime like a scholar examining the mechanics of government and power. Other bosses solved problems with their fists or their guns. They screamed threats at subordinates and demanded instant obedience through fear. Bonanno carried books in his coat pockets. He quoted ancient Roman strategists during family meetings. He analyzed political movements and business trends to predict how they might affect criminal operations. His rivals found this behavior strange and mocked him relentlessly for it. The nickname Joe Bananas spread through New York's underworld like wildfire. Other bosses used it to suggest that Bonanno had lost his mind, that his intellectual pretensions made him weak and unreliable. They whispered that a real boss should intimidate people, not lecture them, about historical precedents. They assumed that his scholarly approach meant he lacked the stomach for necessary violence. These rivals failed to recognize that they were actually revealing his greatest advantage. Bonanno understood something that escaped his more traditional counterparts entirely. Sustainable power came from systems and structures, not just personal charisma or the ability to inspire fear. A boss who relied solely on intimidation created enemies who would eventually unite against him. A leader who built effective organizations could survive challenges that destroyed individual strongmen. The commission system became Bonanno's masterpiece of strategic thinking. He helped establish this national governing body that replaced the traditional capo di tutti capi model with something resembling a corporate board of directors. Instead of one supreme boss who made all decisions and absorbed all risks, the commission distributed authority among equals who could make collective decisions about territorial disputes and major policy questions. This organizational reform represented a complete reimagining of how criminal enterprises could operate in modern America. The old Sicilian model worked in small villages where everyone knew their place in rigid hierarchies. American cities demanded more flexible approaches that could adapt to changing political and economic conditions. The commission provided structure without stifling innovation. Bonanno's deep knowledge of Sicilian traditions gave him credibility with old-school members who might have rejected changes proposed by outsiders. He could speak their language and reference their cultural touchstones while gradually introducing modern management concepts. His strategic innovations attracted ambitious younger men who recognized that traditional methods were becoming obsolete in rapidly changing urban environments. His editor Michael Korda later observed that Bonanno was unlike other mobsters. He quoted classics and discussed political philosophy with genuine understanding, not just to impress people. This intellectual foundation informed his decision-making process and allowed him to see beyond immediate threats and opportunities to longer-term patterns and possibilities. The nickname Joe Bananas actually reflected his willingness to try unconventional approaches that seemed crazy until they worked perfectly. While other bosses rejected new ideas because they challenged established customs, Bonanno tested innovative strategies and kept the ones that produced results. His apparent eccentricity masked a systematic approach to problem-solving that gave him significant advantages over more conventional rivals. The commission system became the foundation of American organized crime for decades after its establishment. It provided a framework for managing disputes, allocating territories, and coordinating criminal activities across different families. This created a more stable and profitable environment that benefited everyone involved. Bonanno had proven that intellectual leadership could be more powerful than physical intimidation. His success with systematic thinking and organizational innovation established him as one of the most influential figures in American Mafia history. But his greatest test of this philosophy was still approaching, in a gamble that would either crown him king of the underworld or destroy everything he had built through decades of careful planning. In 1963, Joseph Bonanno devised the most ambitious power grab in Mafia history. He planned to eliminate multiple commission bosses in coordinated hits that would make him the undisputed ruler of American organized crime. This wasn't just another territorial dispute or personal vendetta. Bonanno was attempting to destroy the very system he had helped create 30 years earlier. Bonanno had grown frustrated with the commission system that governed the five families. The collaborative approach that once seemed so innovative now struck him as weak and ineffective. He watched younger bosses make decisions based on profit rather than tradition. He saw the Mafia becoming a collection of petty criminals rather than a true organization with shared values and common purpose. The commission meetings had turned into endless debates where nothing significant ever got accomplished. His targets included some of the most powerful men in America. Carlo Gambino controlled the largest family in New York and commanded respect from bosses across the country. Tommy Lucchese had built a sophisticated operation that reached into labor unions and legitimate businesses. Stefano Megadino ran Buffalo and controlled territory that stretched into Canada. Frank DeSimone managed operations in Los Angeles. These men weren't just rivals. They were the pillars that supported the entire structure of American organized crime. The plan required perfect timing, absolute secrecy, and the kind of coordinated violence that hadn't been seen since the Castellamarese War 3 decades earlier. Bonanno entrusted Joseph Magliocco with executing the assassinations of Gambino and Lucchese. Magliocco was motivated by his desire for a seat on the commission and readily agreed to participate in the conspiracy. He understood that success would elevate him to the highest levels of Mafia leadership. Bonanno believed that bold action was necessary to prevent the Mafia's complete deterioration. He saw himself as the only leader with enough vision and courage to restore the organization to its former glory. The commission had become too democratic, too willing to compromise on principles that should never be negotiated. Someone needed to take decisive action before everything they had built collapsed into chaos. Magliocco delegated the actual hits to Joseph Colombo, one of his most trusted associates. Colombo had proven himself reliable in previous operations and seemed completely loyal to the Prophesy family hierarchy. This delegation seemed like standard operational security, but it created the vulnerability that destroyed the entire conspiracy. Joseph Colombo discovered the full scope of Bonanno's plot and made a decision that changed everything. Instead of carrying out the assassinations, he revealed the plan to the intended targets. Colombo recognized an opportunity to elevate his own status by betraying his superiors. His disclosure turned Bonanno from hunter into hunted overnight. The commission summoned Bonanno to explain himself, knowing that this meeting would likely be his last. Commission members had survived by eliminating threats before they could mature into actual dangers. Bonanno's conspiracy represented the most serious challenge to their authority since the commission's establishment. They couldn't allow such treachery to go unpunished without encouraging similar attempts from other ambitious bosses. Instead of facing certain death, Bonanno made another calculated decision that surprised everyone. He fled to Montreal in mid-1964, abandoning his empire to save his life. This escape demonstrated that even the most strategic mind could recognize when retreat was the only viable option. Bonanno chose exile over martyrdom. Magliocco faced the commission's wrath alone and confessed his role in the conspiracy. The commission spared his life but forced him into retirement and imposed a $50,000 fine. Colombo was rewarded for his betrayal with control of the Prophesy crime family, proving that loyalty in organized crime could be a liability rather than an asset. This escape triggered the Bonanno War, a violent conflict that split Bonanno's own family and proved that even the smartest strategist could overreach. His greatest strength had become his greatest weakness when ambition clouded his judgment and led him to attempt the impossible. Imagine watching your own crime family turn against itself in a civil war so chaotic that even the FBI couldn't keep track of who was fighting whom. This nightmare became reality for Joseph Bonanno when the commission installed Gaspar di Gregorio to replace him as boss in 1964. The decision split the Bonanno family into 2 armed camps that would spend the next 4 years destroying each other. The Bonanno War differed from every other mafia conflict in American history. Typical mob wars involved different families fighting over territory or business disputes. This was a war within a single organization, with fathers fighting sons and brothers choosing opposite sides. The media recognized the unprecedented nature of this internal struggle and gave it a name that stuck. The violence was personal and unpredictable in ways that traditional mob conflicts never were. Di Gregorio took advantage of growing discontent within the family during Bonanno's absence. Many members felt abandoned by their boss who had fled to Canada without explanation or warning. FBI recordings captured angry Bonanno soldiers expressing their frustration, stating that son of a bitch took off and left us here alone. This resentment gave Di Gregorio the opening he needed to claim leadership with commission backing. Bonanno's supporters remained loyal to their exiled boss and his son Bill, who had stayed in New York to maintain family operations. These loyalists refused to accept Di Gregorio as their legitimate leader. They viewed him as a commission puppet who had no right to control the organization that Bonanno had built over 3 decades. The family fractured along these lines, creating 2 distinct factions that operated like separate criminal organizations. The violence escalated quickly and followed no predictable patterns. In early 1966, DiGregorio allegedly proposed a peace meeting with Bill Bonanno at his granduncle's house in Brooklyn. When Bill and his supporters approached the meeting location on January 28, 1966, they were ambushed with gunfire. Nobody was injured, but the incident proved that neither side trusted the other enough to negotiate seriously. The attempted ambush demonstrated how personal hatred had replaced rational business calculations. Even seasoned mobsters couldn't navigate the shifting alliances and personal vendettas that characterized this conflict. Traditional rules about respect and hierarchy meant nothing when family members were shooting at each other in the streets. The chaos made it impossible for anyone to predict who might switch sides or what might trigger the next outbreak of violence. The commission discovered that they had unleashed forces beyond their control. DiGregorio proved unable to quell the internal rebellion or restore order to the fractured family. His failure to establish legitimate authority embarrassed the commission and exposed their limitations. They eventually abandoned DiGregorio and shifted their support to Paul Sciacca, hoping that a different leader might end the violence. Bonanno watched from exile as the empire he had built over 3 decades destroyed itself in a war that served nobody's interests. The conflict generated no profits, settled no disputes, and created chaos that hurt everyone involved. Members who should have been earning money spent their time preparing for battles. Territory that should have been productive became dangerous and unprofitable. Joseph Bonanno's unexpected return in May 1966 failed to immediately resolve the ongoing conflict. The Bonanno War continued for 2 more years despite his presence. The Commission's shifting support and internal power struggles within the family prolonged the violence and made lasting resolution impossible through traditional means. The conflict exposed a fundamental weakness in the Commission system that Bonanno had helped create. The Commission could start wars, but couldn't easily end them once personal emotions and family honor became involved. Their organizational structure worked well for managing business disputes, but proved inadequate for controlling internal civil wars. The war finally ended in 1968 when Bonanno agreed to retire permanently to Arizona, trading his empire for his life and freedom. This peaceful resolution showed that even in defeat, Bonanno's strategic mind could find solutions that eluded his enemies and ended the senseless violence. In 1983, Joseph Bonanno did something that should have been a death sentence. He published his autobiography, breaking the sacred code of silence that had protected the Mafia for centuries. At age 78, living quietly in his Arizona retirement, Bonanno made the controversial decision to tell his story in A Man of Honor. This wasn't just another crime memoir written by a reformed criminal. This was a sitting former boss revealing secrets that could destroy lives and expose operations that were still active. Writing about Mafia activities violated omerta, the code of silence that demanded death for anyone who revealed family secrets. For generations, this code had been absolute. Men died rather than speak to authorities. They went to prison for decades without saying a word. They watched their families suffer in poverty rather than break the sacred trust. Bonanno was proposing to shatter this tradition in the most public way possible. Other Mafia bosses across the country watched in disbelief as news of the book project spread through criminal networks. They expected swift retaliation against anyone who dared violate such a fundamental principle. The code existed for practical reasons beyond tradition. Loose talk meant arrests, prosecutions, and the destruction of carefully built criminal enterprises. Bonanno seemed to be threatening the security of every active member. Bonanno justified his decision by arguing that he wasn't cooperating with law enforcement or betraying living associates. He claimed he was reflecting on a lifestyle and tradition that was greater than simple secrecy. Since he wasn't compelled to reveal secrets by becoming an informant or government witness, he maintained that he wasn't violating his personal code of honor. This perspective allowed him to navigate the ethical complexities while presenting his autobiography as a personal account rather than a betrayal. His editor, Michael Korda, discovered that Bonanno was unlike other mobsters he had encountered. Corda observed that Bonanno read poetry, boasted of his knowledge of the classics, and gave advice to his cohorts in the form of quotes from Thucydides or Machiavelli. This intellectual approach set him apart from contemporaries who were often, at best, semi-literate. His education and philosophical bent made him see his story as historical documentation rather than criminal confession. The book revealed Bonanno's perspective on Mafia traditions and his role in shaping American organized crime for nearly half a century. He described the commission system he helped establish. He explained the cultural conflicts between old Sicilian ways and modern American realities. He offered insights into decision-making processes that had remained mysterious to outsiders. The autobiography provided unprecedented access to the mind of a major criminal architect. Other bosses condemned the autobiography publicly, but none dared to act against a man who had survived every challenge for 8 decades. Bonanno's reputation for strategic thinking and his ability to anticipate threats made him effectively untouchable. His long history of survival suggested that he had calculated the risks carefully before proceeding with publication. His son's criminal activities in California had already brought FBI attention to the family, making his book more revelation than additional risk. Bill and Joe Jr. were involved in criminal enterprises that kept the Bonanno name in law enforcement files. The family was already under government surveillance, which influenced Bonanno's decision to control his narrative through the autobiography. Bonanno appeared on CBS News' 60 Minutes with Mike Wallace in 1983, coinciding with the book's publication. This television interview demonstrated his willingness to engage with media and shape his public image. The combination of book and interview allowed him to present his version of events to a national audience. Bonanno's autobiography became a bestseller and established him as the only major mafia boss to tell his own story and live to see its publication. This achievement represented the ultimate expression of his lifelong strategy of turning apparent weakness into unexpected strength. By writing the book, he controlled his legacy while his enemies could only watch and complain. Joseph Bonanno died of heart failure on May 11, 2002, at age 97 in Tucson, Arizona. He had outlived virtually every contemporary in a world where most men died violently before age 60. While other bosses fell to bullets or prison sentences, Bonanno survived through strategic thinking and careful planning. His story proves that intelligence and adaptability were more valuable than violence and intimidation in organized crime. Modern assessments portray him as a complex figure who balanced brutality with deep understanding of tradition and strategy. Bonanno's legacy lives on in the organizational structures he created and the principles he demonstrated throughout his remarkable life. His remarkable life.